Hi there and welcome back to the Explaining History videocast. This is the second video in a series that I'm doing on how to develop an essay, really. The last video, if you haven't watched it, it's worth going back now and checking out because that was a video on how to develop a line of argument. If you haven't got a line of argument, you're going to have great difficulties in creating any kind of robust answer at all. So, if you haven't watched video 1, stop now, go back, watch it, come back to this, get to this point, and start again. Okay, great, you're here, you're back. Okay, and for the rest of you who have been following the whole series, thanks for your kind of consistency. So today we're going to continue with the essay that we were looking at. I'm just going to call it up now, and I'm going to show you how we go from the introduction into the main body of the essay and how we keep it consistent, because sometimes there's this tendency to write an introduction and then launch into something completely different or say completely different things. So we're not going to do that. So let's just look back at what we were talking about. So we've got this very contentious statement. The Nazis ruled overwhelmingly through terror. How valid is this statement? And the point is it's, if you're watching the other video, it's too general. It's too broad. There are too many difficulties with it. So in answering this question, it's first possible to identify several problems with the statement. The use of terror between 1933 and 1945 varied as a result of different internal and external pressures on the regime. So it fluctuated over time, it wasn't consistent, it wasn't constant, and the groups who were victims of Nazi terror were a diverse range of minorities, not the vast majority of the population. The statement is therefore too general and does not address the specifics of Nazi rule and does not account for change over time. The regime ruled using a variety of techniques. They relied on the groundswell of popularity in the early years of Nazism and attempted to cultivate and maintain that popularity through economic and social policies throughout the 1930s. There was a selective use of terror against the communist and socialist parties, asocials and other undesirables, and from 1938 onwards, terror was directed against the Jews. It's important to make a clear distinction here between everyday persecution that the groups like the Jews experienced and the workings of the terror state. Obviously, we've got very specific about what terror actually means, designed to stifle opposition. Because the Jews were seen as something slightly different in the minds of the Nazis. The Nazis viewed Aryan troublemakers, people like the communists, as being threats to their power. The Jew and other aspects of German society, asocial types and that kind of thing, as degenerate, the social ballast that needed to be cut away in order to make Germany a kind of a lean, strong, and warlike nation again. The Jews are seen as this kind of external enemy, not really one that is going to be vying for high political office, but a racial enemy. And so the persecution of the Jews from the late 1930s onwards takes a very different kind of character, and we'll get to that later. So this is going to be the essence of the next bit you're going to do. Every paragraph has to have these three features: a point supported by evidence that comes to a judgment. A paragraph is a way of saying, here's what I think. Here's your point. Here's what I think. Here's why I think it, and here's what it shows us. And once you can do that, the here's what it shows us bit, the judgment bit, will link neatly back to the argument that you started with in the first place. So it's through the judgment that the argument flows throughout the essay. So we're going to start chronologically. We're going to look at the first instance of terror. And that's really in 1933 with the Reichstag fire and the arrest of the Communist Party. So if we are sticking closely to what the question is asking us and looking at the extent and the widespread nature of Nazi terror, what we've got to do is make a distinction here in the first bit. When Hitler has the Communist the Constitution suspended and the Communist Party arrested, along with the Social Democrats, anarchists, and the rest of the organised political left, whilst that does mount to tens of thousands of people, the vast majority of Germans remain kind of unaffected by the events that they see. The Reichstag fire, the destruction of the Reichstag, is a deeply shocking event in German society. I suppose you could probably make it roughly analogous to the shock that many Americans would have felt after the assassination of Kennedy. Something truly extraordinary and aberrant and terrifying had happened to one of the main features of public life, the Reichstag building itself. And when the communists are round up and arrested, there is, to some extent, public approval or complicity or relief or some adjective kind of like that describes many emotions. There is not a great deal of evidence that suggests that the majority of Germans were appalled. There had been, obviously, throughout the 1920s and 30s to the east, an example of communism in action in Stalin's Russia, which had been terrifying to the majority of middle-class Germans. The German working classes and working class organisations are shattered by the events of the Reichstag fire and its aftermath. They are the ones who are least likely to have approved of any of this. But ordinary working class Germans aren't particularly terrorised. Those that understand that really keeping your head down now and staying out of political matters in general is the correct way to go about things. So as far as terror goes in this instance, let's just scroll back up and have a look at what the question was asking us. The Nazis ruled overwhelmingly through terror. Well, in this instance, here is evidence of the Nazis selectively applying terror. They don't attack everybody. They don't arrest, drag people off the streets who they don't suspect of being communists or involved in the socialist movement. And there are a great many people who write about the notion that really had the communists seized power, they would have done exactly the same thing. There are a great many German diarists who attempt to add justifications to what they've seen and experienced. There are a great many German diarists who leave behind primary evidence for us to suggest that there is a very strong sense that the communists were going to be planning a revolution and that these were desperate times and that the Führer was doing something decisive that needed to be done. So let's see if we can write that now then. So let's get rid of this point evidence judgment bit. Okay. So the first use of Nazi terror occurred in the aftermath of the Reichstag fire. So we're going to have to give a bit of evidence to the examiner that we know what the Reichstag fire was. It was Hitler's opportunity to suspend the constitution. Invoke Article 48. Alright, emergency powers. Give that a capital letter. Watch your capitals. 48. So that is a bit of contextual knowledge. We're showing that we know what we're talking about. Now we're into the argument. We'll call them opponents, not rivals. So this is an interesting idea here. Well, I would say that because I wrote it. But this idea that the majority of German people didn't experience terror directly. They observed it only as bystanders. They read about it in newspapers. They, heard about it as rumours. They maybe have saw people being arrested, and they saw the concentration camps that many of these new socialist troublemakers and prisoners were thrown into, because places like Dachau were quite easy to reach. In the Soviet Union, the Gulag system, the labour camps, were hidden far out of the sight of public scrutiny. But Hitler was quite happy for German people to see specifically what he was doing. It served a number of purposes. Firstly, it acted as a deterrent to anybody who was thinking of opposing the state, but also it provided the German people with evidence that actually something was being done. These dangerous subversives who must be kept away from society for some good reason, this is the way the psychology of these things often works, were being reformed. The places like Dachau, obviously cruel, harsh, violent regimes in which many of the socialists and communists died, were also labour camps, and there's this idea that's deep-rooted in Nazi ideology that the work is this kind of transformative experience, that through work one becomes reformed. Okay, so back to what I'm doing. So the first use of Nazi terror occurred in the aftermath of the Reichstag fire. This is true. The Reichstag was burned down at the end of February 1933. I'm pretty sure I got the date right there, but if it was the 1st of March, I do apologise. I'm pretty sure it's the end of Feb, but I will atone on the next video if I got that date wrong. And it was Hitler's opportunity to suspend the German constitution and invoke emergency powers through Article 48. Okay, so we're given a bit of context. Now into the argument. The mass arrests of communists, socialists, and anarchists and trade unionists was a targeted use of terror against Hitler's political opponents, and whilst the effect on Germany's left was devastating, the majority of Germans did not experience terror directly and observed it only as bystanders. So I've done kind of a point with some evidence and a bit of a judgment there. I can continue the judgment by saying a couple of other things. So we can now go. So this. Okay, so from here, the next thing to look at, I'll do this on the next video, would be probably, I would love to say more on this, but the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. Okay, so catch me on the next video. Now the best thing to do is if you subscribe to this YouTube channel, I will give you weekly essay updates, and we'll go on and look at other topics other than this and show you how to structure essays. You can do that by subscribing here, obviously. If you want more help, you can contact me at info@explaininghistory.com. You can go to the site, which is, I'll show you, www.explaininghistory.com. And the other thing that you can do is sign up for the Explaining History podcast. You can do that through the website. We've currently got over 10,000 listeners, so I must be doing something right. Anyway, hope this is useful, and I will catch you on the next Explaining History videocast.